This is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3. Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for good programming, and I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hey, thanks for being here this Wednesday, January 15th. Well, the long-awaited ceasefire in Gaza looks like it is finally here. That's the great news, and I'll tell you exactly what it means coming up. But the sad news is the deal that they've agreed to is very much like the same deal that the Biden administration has been pushing for months and months. One of Benjamin Netanyahu's top advisors bragged to a reporter that he had killed several ceasefire deals. Hey, this is on them. This is not on us. This is not on Joe Biden. This is on Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. Anyway, let's look at the positive side, Joan, shall we? Yes, Joan, let's. So here's the deal. First phase of this deal. This is a ceasefire that is supposed to last at least 6 weeks, but can be extended beyond that. Okay? It's going to be rolled out in phases. The first phase would involve 33 hostages being released over the 42-day period in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. That's the deal. Okay? 3 hostages are to be released first. I know. Hey, it's better than nothing. And that's going to take place in the next, the agreement says that will take place in the next 48 to 72 hours. In the next 2 to 3 days. Maybe longer if they have trouble arranging it. So we're going to hopefully see 3 people released as early as 2 days from now. An Israeli official said that the captives would be released in stages, and the first stage would be children, women, injured people, and those 50 and older. In the second stage, the other remaining hostages and Israeli soldiers being held captive by Hamas would be released. The Washington Post is reporting they have sources within Israel that are estimating that there are a total of 60 living hostages remaining in Gaza. That would be the people who were taken on October 7th and also Israeli soldiers who have been taken captive. Israel agrees to release hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians. No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I got my 2 paragraphs. Not hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians who have fled the bombardment in Gaza are going to be allowed to return to their homes in the north. These are not hostages. Nobody has these people. These are not being released. These are displaced Palestinians. Hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians are going to be allowed to return to their homes in the north of Gaza. Unspecified security measures are supposed to be in place. There is going to be this buffer zone that has been talked about between Israel and Gaza. There is an east-west passage called the Netzarim Corridor. The Israeli military is there right now, and it is unclear whether or not they will remain. Again, the plan as it exists now is that 3 hostages are going to be released in the next 2 to 3 days. 33 hostages, children, women, injured, are going to be released in Phase 2, and Phase 3 will also see Israeli soldiers released. Exactly how many and which hostages are going to be released, when they're going to be released, the number of Palestinian prisoners who are going to be released, how many troops are going to remain in Gaza, that's a little bit fuzzier. We don't really have every single detail worked out. But thank God they didn't wait to have every single detail worked out, don't you think? You know, there's a big picture agreement. Ceasefire, no more military action in Gaza for the next 6 weeks or so. And the hostages, civilian and military, coming home. Let's hope this ceasefire, even though it is only, this first one is only supposed to be 42 days. Everybody has made it quite clear that it can be renewed. It is renewable. And that's just great news. That is absolutely great news. There is also part of this agreement that hasn't exactly been worked out in precise detail, that the bodies of Israeli hostages that Hamas has are also going to be sent home. Obviously, the living come first, children, women, those injured at first, those over 50, and then a second group that also includes Israeli military who've been captured. But part of this deal that hasn't been worked out specifically is also that any civilian hostages or military whose bodies are in the possession of Hamas, those will also be returned to their families. President Biden made remarks about this deal, which has been, they have been negotiating this deal for more than a year. And like I said, the sad part is that what they have finally agreed to now is very similar to what the Biden administration proposed a year ago. But whatever. It took us too long to get here, but we're here. And a little bit later today, I'm going to have President Biden's remarks for you. But after he finished his remarks and he talked about what a Herculean effort this has been to get this deal done, he took a couple of questions. As he was walking away from the podium, one reporter shouted out something to the effect of, did Donald Trump have anything to do with this deal? And Joe Biden stops and he turns around and he smiles and he says, "Is that a joke?" And he turns around and he leaves. Because I know that pretty soon Donald Trump is going to claim that this was him. It was either his election that spurred this, or it was some sort of, the fact that he and Bibi Netanyahu are such good friends. He's going to, just like he's going to take credit for Joe Biden's jobs numbers and the economy, you know darn well he's going to be taking credit for this. And let's just be clear right now. This has been the Biden administration They have been working on this for more than a year. And don't let Donald Trump try to convince you that he had anything to do with it. The only mention of Trump that I've heard in this whole process was that, he's going to get sworn in on Monday. Apparently, the Biden transition folks included the Trump transition folks on all the information surrounding what's happened, how it's happened, and what has been agreed to. So the Trump transition team has been made aware of what's going on. Doesn't mean they had anything to do with it. Don't you believe that for a minute. And let's just see. I can't imagine, after more than a year in captivity, how awful life is going to be, how difficult it's going to be to find some degree of normalcy for these hostages. But better that than continuing on as they have been. Let's take a break. We're going to be back with much more after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
The Sports Cubicle.
Here in WCPT, we're fortunate enough to have the new head coach of DePaul University, Chris Holtman. You have that tough December where you're going to have 2 conference games, and then does that seem like it's going to work for you? Are you going to be having up-tempo, or do you even know that yet?
We are really trying to play with great pace, more so than really at any point in my career. That's something we've really emphasized since the summer.
The Sports Cubicle with Mike Mercado, Devin Tingle, Dan Marver, and Paul Shabari. Sunday nights, 9 p.m. on WCPT.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Oh, we have got those Biden remarks. These are the remarks he made after it was announced that a ceasefire deal for the release of the hostages being held by Hamas has been reached. It is going to unfold over the next 42 days. Hopefully within the next couple of days or so, at least 3 hostages will be released. They are starting with the children and the women, the injured, and those 50 and older. That will be phase 1. Phase 2 will be the rest of the hostages and Israeli soldiers who have been taken captive. The deal is supposed to last for 42 days, but it can be extended. That's what everybody is saying. It can be extended. So let's listen to what Joe Biden had to say. Okay, hang on. All right, we're having a little tiny itty-bitty baby technical problem. Lady B is reloading it as we speak. So again, I just want to go over what is in this agreement. Phase 1, the release of 33 hostages, children, women, injured people, those 50 and older. In the next 2 to 3 days, 3 hostages are supposed to be released. Palestinians in jail in Israel are being released to pave the way for this deal. There will be a second stage, which is the remaining hostages and captive soldiers. Israel told the Washington Post they believe that there are 60 living hostages in Gaza. Okay, we've got Biden's remarks now. Go ahead, listen to this.
Good afternoon. It's a very good afternoon, because at long last, I can announce a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. For more than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th, more than 15 months of terror for the hostages, their families, the Israeli people, more than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop, and soon the hostages will return home to their families. The elements of this deal for what I laid out in detail this past May, which was embraced by countries around the world and endorsed overwhelmingly by the UN Security Council. The deal is structured in 3 phases. Phase 1 will last 6 weeks. It includes a full and complete ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli forces from all the populated areas of Gaza, and the release of a number of hostages held by Hamas, including women and elderly and the wounded. And I'm proud to say Americans will be part of that hostage release in Phase 1 as well. And the Vice President and I cannot wait to welcome them home. In exchange, Israel released hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. And during Phase 1, the Palestinians can also return to their neighborhoods in all the areas of Gaza. And the surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza will begin. And the innocent people can have a greater access to these vital supplies. You know, during the next 6 weeks, Israel will negotiate the necessary arrangements to get Phase 2, which is a permanent end of the war. Let me say it again, a permanent end of the war. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from Phase 1 to Phase 2, but the plan says if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire will continue as long as the negotiations continue. I've spoken to the Emir of Kuwait and the President of Egypt, and we have pledged to make sure the negotiations will keep moving forward for as long as it takes. Then, when Phase 2 begins, there will be an exchange for release of the remaining living hostages, including male soldiers, and all remaining Israeli forces will be withdrawn from Gaza, and the temporary ceasefire will become permanent. And finally, Phase 3, any final remains of hostages who have been killed will be returned to their families, and a major reconstruction plan for Gaza will begin. This is the ceasefire agreement I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement.
Yes, they have agreed to that ceasefire agreement. And as part of that agreement, Palestinians will be allowed to return to the northern portions of Gaza. They will be allowed to return to their homes. There are supposedly some security measures that are going to be put in place, but exactly what those security measures are going to be hasn't been specifically worked out yet. As I told you, after President Biden finished his remarks, he took a couple of questions, and as he was walking away, one of the reporters wanted to know if Donald Trump had anything to do with negotiating this settlement. Joe Biden was already turning away and getting ready to and starting to leave the room when that question was lobbed. But he felt that it was worth taking a minute or two or a second or two or 5 seconds, 10 seconds to give that reporter a quick response. Listen to this.
Thank you.
Most credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
Listen to this.
What is the highest level of international security agreement that you have led? And can you name some that the Secretary of Defense would lead? There's 3 main ones. Do you know?
I have not been involved in international security arrangements because I have not been in government.
These
Commanders meet
statements.
quotas to have a certain number of female infantry officers or infantry enlisted, and that disparages those women.
Commanders do not have to meet quotas for the infantry. Commanders do not have to have a quota for women in the infantry. That does not exist.
Senator, anonymous false charges. They're not anonymous. And I'll just conclude and say this to the chairman. You claim that this was all anonymous. We have seen records with names attached to all of these, including the name of your own mother.
And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of nations in that, but I know we have allies in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia and trying to work on submarines with them.
Mr. Hegseth, none of those countries are in ASEAN.
Across.
None of those 3 countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of negotiations.
Yeah, such an impressive guy, don't you think? I mean, utterly unfit. And people are saying, oh, well, the Republicans will fall into line. Even the Republicans who think he's completely unfit have said, well, it's Donald Trump's right to have whoever he wants in his cabinet. And most people are speculating that in a matter of 7 or 8 months, he will do something, Pete Hegseth will do something so outrageous that he will be fired. But God forbid, even though they can see that coming down the road, God forbid anybody should eliminate him from contention now. We're going to take a break. We are going to be talking to WCPT's morning host, Stephanie Miller, about her newest live sexy liberal show when we come right back after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's #1 on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Every morning here on WCPT, you are informed, enlightened, and entertained by our very own Stephanie Miller. She is bringing another live, sexy, liberal comedy tour in the very near future this Saturday to Washington, D.C., you can watch it from the comfort of your own home. It will be on pay-per-view. Stephanie is here right now to give us a preview. Hello, Stephanie. How are you doing?
It's my very own Joan Esposito.
Yes,
I know
indeed.
That you belong to Chicago, but I think of you as my very own Joan Esposito.
I'm always yours. Always have been. Always will be. Hey, I was really blown away by this guest list. This A-list of guests you have in Washington. Jamie Raskin, George Conway, Olivia Troy, Jojo from Jersey, and Harry Dunn. Oh, my gosh, that's going to be amazing. In addition to Hal Sparks, John Fugelsang, and Frangela are already amazing.
Yeah. We just added Tara Setmeyer to the DC, who's also fabulous. You've probably seen her on TV a lot.
Yeah.
Joan, it is amazing how some of these ex-Republicans, like Olivia Troy, George Conway, they're in some ways pushing back. I was saying David Frum and Michael Steele, right to Joe Scarborough's face, has been talking about not bending the knee and not obeying. And so,
yes, I thought that was a very interesting exchange. On social media, a lot of people were saying, hey, maybe Michael Steele should be doing the morning show. He seems to be a little bit more in line with our values.
I agree. I agree. I keep saying it, Joan, every morning. But, courage is contagious, and so is cowardice. And, in my opinion, and have, the morning show on the liberal channel be the first ones to bend the knee and go obey in advance because, I think that cowardice spread to ABC News, who settled the lawsuit that they would have won. Donald Trump is an adjudicated rapist. That is a true
and a convicted felon.
Right. The judge, adjudicated means the judge in the trial said what you did equates to rape. Just because the legal thing he got convicted of is sexual assault. I love that this is where we're at, Joan. That's some big flex to go, oh, he's only a sexual assaulter. I'm like, really? And here we are with Pete Hegseth now. We're just like, oh, my God, how much lower can the bar go, right?
Yeah, and the worst part is that after an initial hopeful tiny period window where it looked like Hegseth was going to drop out. You know, he doubled down. Trump, of course, admires that. Anybody who's willing to, you know, own the libs. And now it looks like some kind of behind-the-scenes pressure has been applied to people like Joni Ernst, who were they were repelled by him. They were repelled by Hegseth. And now they're going to vote to send his nomination along.
This is just the beginning, Joan, of the bullying and Elon Musk's money to, you know, primary people. And, you have a woman, combat veteran sexual assault survivor who is now going to vote for this, you know, accused rapist, whatever you want to call him. You know, I mean, and that, by the way, he kept talking about meritocracy, you know, in terms of women not able to serve in the military. I'm like, meritocracy? No one deserves this less than you. Like, you know, like no one's less qualified for this job than you. Like, what are you talking about? Like you're getting this on your merit? You're getting it because you're a Fox News host that will do Trump talking points, right?
Yeah, exactly. I just want you to know how much we enjoy your show in the mornings. You have some of the most amazing guests on your show. One of my personal favorites is Malcolm Nance. I love that man.
He was on fire this morning. I know, and you know
he's always on fire. I'm surprised you don't have to hose him down.
We're on. Yeah, I said thank you, Shouty McShout. Say hello to everyone in Shouttown. But yeah, no, we're on YouTube now, and so I know stuff like Senator Sheldon Whitehouse called us and said he's been loving the show. And can he come on? And I was like, yeah, I love Sheldon Whitehouse. I mean, you know, Joan, just because we feel like there's nothing we can do about the corruption at the Supreme Court right now, it doesn't mean that I don't really admire people like Senator Whitehouse that's out there screaming about it still, you know, and just saying this is not normal. This is not normal. We just can't normalize this.
And you know, Stephanie, the worst part is that he's not even president yet. I think this is going to get so much worse before it gets better.
Like we've already lived through. It's like, oh my God, is the 4 years over? Oh God, it hasn't even started yet. Like it just feels like we've already lived. I mean, you have to understand, Joan. I'm out here in L.A. and we are already in such a stressful, horrible apocalypse right now. And, of course, he's just making it worse. And this is what we're in for 4 years, is him lying, him being petty, vindictive, saying he's not going to help people in California because, of course, and you know what that's all about. Gavin Newsom's going to run for president, right?
Sure, of course.
And, you know, so anyway, it's just, I mean.
By the way, are you okay? Are the fires anywhere near you? How's the air quality?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm wearing a mask when I go outside, but knock on wood, Joan, but it's terrifying literally not knowing which way the wind's going to blow. I mean, knock on wood, I've been okay, but I'm terrified to leave my house and dogs Friday to go to D.C. after the show.
Oh, my God, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I do it for America, Joan. But anyway,
you know, my daughter came home for the holidays. She lives in Burbank, and every time she's booked a flight home, it's like, first of all, she booked a flight home and the fires erupted, so she moved it back. And then there was a little bit of a calm, and then the fires erupted, and her roommate, you know, because Burbank isn't burning, but the air quality is awful. Her roommate and all the other friends we have out there, they've either evacuated into somebody else's home, or they tell her, you know, don't come back. Just don't.
Yeah, I know. You know, Mark Hamill, who was, you know, as you know, was at the Chicago Sexy Liberal show, which you were at, which was so fantastic with Governor Pritzker and on. He had to evacuate. Thank God his home, knock on wood, is still okay. But you know, he had to evacuate, so he's at his daughter's house. He and his wife are there. And so anyway, oh, my God, and, you know, I've been lucky enough to have been to his home in Malibu, and I thought, oh, my God, you would not believe the amount of priceless stuff he has on his walls, like artists that have done Star Wars paintings for him, famous, like, oh my God, just like irreplaceable stuff, and it's so I don't know, but it just really is horrifying, that we're up to 25 dead, and it's I like I say, Joan, the lies and the cruelty are just making it exponentially worse.
This is the first major disaster that I can remember. People not putting partisan interests aside and working for everyone's good. I mean, I think it's happening in L.A., directly in L.A., but the fact that so many Republicans are like, oh, Democrats caused the fire. Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass caused the fire. This, it's so cruel.
And the fire experts, as you've probably seen, all of them, Joan, have said there is no water system in the world that can handle 8 months, a fire hurricane after 8 months of drought with 100-mile-an-hour winds. Like, there is just no, that's the thing. Every single thing they're saying that we ran out of water and this and all that. They're all lies. They're all lies. It's water pressure. Like, imagine turning everything in your house, so it's just, anyway, but you're right. And it's not, what's cruel, Joan, is it's deliberate disinformation.
Yes.
It's not like,
it's not like they saw bad information posted on Facebook and they're reposting it. No, they're inventing this out of whole cloth.
Yeah. No, absolute lies that are so easily debunked. Gavin Newsom's had to set up a whole website to debunk all of, and Elon Musk was told to his face by the L.A. fire chief the truth, and he chose not to. That's when he dumped out of the live stream, and then he lied about when he was told right to his face that what he was saying was wrong, and he went on X and immediately put out this disinformation, and it's just, oh my God, Joan, it's not DEI, it's not, there's no water, it's, it's like, first of all, for the first 27 hours, no planes could fly because it was 100-mile-an-hour winds, so that's obviously part of, the problem. But anyway, I hear one more ridiculous lie after the other. There's always, and there's a new one. One gets debunked and they come up with some new lie.
Yeah. I want to talk again about this show that you are doing in D.C. once you, of course, are sure that your dogs are well taken care of and head off to D.C. This is going to be like the show in Chicago. This is going to be live streamed, right?
Yeah, on pay-per-view. I mean, if you can join us live, if you're coming to the People's March or whatever, we'd love to see you at the Warner Theater. It's a gorgeous theater in D.C. And, we need each other more than ever now. We need humor more than ever. And, if anybody, the brilliance of Frangela and John Fugelsang and Hal Sparks, by the way, Chicago's own Hal Sparks and Chicago's own Francis Callier. And then, like you say, that lineup is just really, and what I love about it is bipartisan and all people that realize really the danger that we're facing. As you said before, we've got Representative Jamie Raskin and George Conway and Olivia Troy and Officer Harry Dunn and JoJo from JERS and former Republican strategist Tara Setmeyer, who is also an amazing woman of color that is, speaking. I don't know, Joan, whether we need to learn how to fight differently, but I swear to God, some of these former Republicans seem to model how to fight.
Isn't that the truth? I mean, you've got Jamie Raskin, who has been very blunt. Eric Swalwell seems to be able to take it to them. Chris Murphy, good God, I love Chris Murphy more than I've ever loved him before. Because he's coming out and he's saying, hey, we got to fight. Where are the Democrats? Come on, Democrats. Let's get going here, because that's what it's going to take. I mean, I've been talking about how when Barack Obama was elected, there was a Republican brain trust that met at a restaurant. And the whole thing was, what are we going to do for the next 4 years? And they came up with the plan that they were going to try to fight all of his legislation. They were going to try to make him a one-term president. Where are the Democrats? Where's the restaurant back room that the Democratic leadership is meeting in to plan out what everybody's going to do, what everybody's going to say, and how everybody's going to fight?
Yeah, and that's the point of fascism, Joan, is they want us to lay down and die. They want us to despair. They want us to check out and give up. And you're absolutely right. That's what's so what's so important right now, like WCPT and your show and all of the, what I call democracy warriors, truth warriors, because we lost this election, I'll tell you, for one reason, Joan, and that's, again, what we're in the vortex of in L.A. It's disinformation. Mm-hmm. Look, amazing economy Biden is leaving, as he gives his farewell address tonight. We didn't lose on the economy, Joan. We lost on disinformation about the economy. By every statistic, Joe Biden has turned an absolute S show that Donald Trump left. I mean, by every single barometer, and so that's the problem. If we lost, Joan, on real issues, but you know what? Like, for instance, if we were like, oh, no, we're for them doing trans surgery on kids in school without your permission. Mm-hmm. We're for patients eating pets. I mean, we lost a solid wall of lies that Donald Trump gets a certain percentage of the country to believe, which you and I would think, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, who would believe that? But it's like you watch Fox News. It is a solid wall of lie about the L.A. fires. It's infuriating. You're just like, well,
6 months ago, my partner Ray and I were making a home purchase, and the young woman who was our saleswoman said that she had been in the home in our neighborhood. She had been in the home recently of a woman who was buying some home remodeling stuff. And the woman told her, this is an older woman who doesn't have school-age kids, but told her, did you know the local school has an entire floor of classrooms that are just transgender? Did you know that? And the young woman looked at us and she was like, I'm here to sell this woman some really expensive stuff. And I'm just kind of looking at her and kind of going, good.
Is just so depressing. It really, I mean, that's the thing is you just see like all the tweets. People go like, well, the price of eggs isn't going to be any better, but at least that one girl can't play badminton in your state.
Yeah,
I mean,
really.
What tiny percentage of this even affects you or your life, and yet they spent $100 million.
But that's the Republican strategy. We don't want anybody to pay attention to Jack Smith's report. We don't want anybody to pay attention to the lack of qualification of the cabinet nominees. So let's get them all mad about transgender athletes. Okay, sure, there's only, like 20 at the college level, but let's get everybody mad about that. And they're not going to pay attention to the fact that all this other stuff is going on. And, oh, by the way, the price of eggs is still going up.
Yeah. I mean, God, yeah, and primarily because of bird flu. And guess who's coming in? Bobby Brainworm Kennedy. I'm just like, oh, God. I mean, it's. I swear to God, like one nominee is more horrific than the last one. It's
yes.
Like,
I know the ones that are really, really mediocre are starting to look like Thomas Jefferson. Marco Rubio is starting to look like, the one we can hang our hat on, for God's sake.
I know. Well, he's the only one that's even vaguely qualified for what he's nominated, so.
Yeah. Stephanie, thank you so much. I'm going to wrap this up, folks, by telling you that if you want to call into the station right now, 773-763-9278, the second caller, Lady B, will be answering the phones. The second caller is going to get a code to watch the live stream for free. You'll have, the live stream is going to be on sexyliberal.com. We have a code for you so you can sit this Saturday night with your feet up and a beverage in your hand and enjoy the comedy of John Fugelsang, Hal Sparks, Frangela, and the commentary of Jamie Raskin, George Conway, Olivia Troy, Georgia from Jersey Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, and Tara Setmeyer. It is going to be an amazing show, and thank you so much for sharing this with us here.
I know your listeners get it, but, it's only $20 to buy the pay-per-view, and it really supports this whole, ecosphere of the truth tellers and funny truth tellers desperately need now. Thank you so much. Please.
And especially since the mainstream media seems to be letting us down, it's going to be people like Stephanie Miller and independent media sources that I think we're going to have to rely on. Sign up for ProPublica, folks. It's a good site.
Yep, there you go. Joan, it was so great to see you in Chicago and your beautiful face.
Well, you're very kind. You're very kind. It was so much fun. It's always so much fun to hear you and your guests.
All right. We love you, Chicago. I'll see you Saturday on pay-per-view.
Take care. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back right after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
Out Chicago.
How are you doing,
I am immersing myself in as many positive experiences, i.e. theater, music, whatever I can do.
I keep going back to doing your joy homework.
Yes.
During this point, joy is a practice. Yes. And you have to actively seek out the things that bring you joy.
Catch Out Chicago every Sunday, 11 to 1 on WCPT 820. You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I offered up the streaming code for Stephanie Miller's live broadcast, which is taking place this Saturday. She's going to be live in D.C. with Jamie Raskin, George Conway, Olivia Troy, and a whole host of others, including her regulars, Hal Sparks, John Fugelsang, and Frangela. You can watch it on pay-per-view, as she said, for $20. Go to sexyliberal.com and click the Save the World Comedy Tour banner, okay, if you weren't the second caller. I believe Patty is going to give away a code, and Richard is going to give away a code as well tomorrow morning. And I'm going to be giving away codes tomorrow and Friday for this Saturday night broadcast. And the boilerplate, you have to be 18 years old, live in the greater Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana, southern Wisconsin area, one entry per person, one winner per household, void where prohibited by law. You could only win or qualify to win once every 30 days. The rules are on our website, WCPT820.com. Click on the contest tab. Okie dokie. And as Stephanie mentioned, Joe Biden is giving his farewell address to the nation tonight from the White House. It is going to be 7 p.m. tonight. That is Chicago time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And where can you find it? Well, pretty much everywhere. CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, MSNBC have said they're going to carry it. It's also going to be on DirecTV, Sling TV, Hulu, and Live TV. It's going to be on the White House website. It is going to be on the White House YouTube channel. And, of course, my personal favorite, C-SPAN. C-SPAN.org, the place where I go for all of my geeky political speeches. And that will be tonight. Biden did his last media interview, interestingly, with Lawrence O'Donnell from MSNBC. Lawrence O'Donnell used to work on Capitol Hill. Lawrence O'Donnell, you may not know this about him, he was also a writer out in Hollywood for a while. He wrote on The West Wing, among others. And then, of course, he came to MSNBC as a host. He's been doing that for, I know it's more than 10 years. How many more years than that, I'm not sure. But he's been at MSNBC for a very long time. And he has been a big supporter and an admirer of Joe Biden. So it really shouldn't be a huge surprise. What a great honor. I mean, he could have given this last interview to anybody. He could have given it to somebody with a bigger audience. But he gave it to someone who knows Capitol Hill, who knows Joe Biden and his entire career. Lawrence O'Donnell, when he was talking to Rachel Maddow about this interview, he said that, he's followed Joe Biden's career the entire some 37 years he's been in politics. He was a senator, he was a vice president, and then as president. And he said the only concern he had about the interview was that he has questions about all those parts of Joe Biden's life, and he wasn't sure there would be time. So tonight, the farewell address of one of the most decent men since Jimmy Carter to be in the White House. And we will hear what he has to say. And then we can sit back and for the first year of the Trump administration, we can listen over and over again to Donald Trump taking credit for everything that Joe Biden put in motion. The Build Back Better, the infrastructure bill. You don't just pass a bill like that and instantly, the very next morning, you're going to see road crews out fixing your nearby bridge. This is government. You pass the bill, you allot the funds, people who need, states who feel they need the funds, they make their argument why they should get the funds and how much. And then after contemplation, funds are allotted, and then the projects have to be planned. It isn't a quick process. It is at least a year, if not 2 years, before a big infrastructure Build Back Better bill turns into actual cement pouring. And the cement pouring has begun. It is in progress, and it will continue. That's one of the many things that the Biden administration has been locking up before they leave the White House, is making sure all of these allocated funds have been spent, that there isn't money sitting around for fear that Donald Trump will just simply cancel it. They're also trying to make sure that aid to the state of California gets through because Republican Speaker Mike Johnson wants to blackmail Democrats. Like, we're not going to vote for aid for California unless you agree to X, Y, or Z. Right now, they're talking about the debt ceiling. That's going to be their big bat that they're going to try to smack the Democrats with. You do this for us, and maybe we'll do that for you. Like somehow it's doing Democrats a favor to help out the people of California. I don't like Mike Johnson. I was trying to reserve judgment. I've, in the past, tried to frame what he does in the best possible light, but I don't like him. I don't think he's any good. I don't think he's a fine human being. I think he's a weak man. Anyway, let's take a break for news. I think I'm starting to get a little cranky, so let's take a break for news. I will settle down, and we will continue on after this.
You're the only voice of reason on the radio.
You give me hope.
Having listened to you every day.
Thank you for your clear insight.
Always felt a little bit smarter.
I listen to you every single day.
I keep coming back to this station, and thank you for what you do.
On WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you. From, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
I'm very pleased to be joined by Chris Lehman, who is the D.C. Bureau Chief and columnist for The Nation magazine. Chris, how are you doing?
Oh, as well as can be expected.
That's the perfect answer. That is the perfect answer, Chris.
Yeah.
I usually just tell Peachy that I tell people that I'm peachy, and they can interpret peachy however they wish. And, sometimes I think if I just keep telling people that I'm peachy, that eventually I will be peachy. It's like I'm trying to manifest that kind of a mindset. I don't know.
The power of positive thinking.
Yeah. A few minutes ago, I was talking about Jimmy Carter. Tonight Joe Biden is going to make his farewell address. And did I say tonight Joe Biden makes his farewell address? And I think that he has the same, not the same style, certainly, but I think he has the same good moral character that somebody like a Jimmy Carter brought to the president's office. I know you wrote, when Jimmy Carter died recently, your obituary talked about not just Jimmy Carter, but the fact that the evangelical Christians who initially supported him eventually left and moved to the right, where they seemingly are very happy and apparently plan to stay. Talk about that, if you would.
Sure. It seems like another universe, but, in 1976, Jimmy Carter won a narrow majority, but still a majority of the evangelical vote in the country, in large part because he himself was an evangelical and, made promises on the stump, like he would never lie to the American people. And, I think tried in certain policy forums, notably in making human rights a plank of U.S. foreign relations, followed through on his beliefs. But, the evangelical community fell out pretty rapidly with Carter for a couple of reasons. One was a ruling under his IRS. He actually didn't know about it in advance, but a ruling that would take away tax-exempt status from private religious schools that did not achieve a certain threshold of racial balance. And that created a huge uprising among Christians who founded religious schools for a host of reasons, including racial segregation. The segregation academies stretched back in the South, particularly to the Brown v. Board of Education decision.
Chris, did I hear you say that Carter didn't know about it ahead of time?
That's correct. His IRS sort of moved independently on it, so he was completely caught off guard both by the decision itself and the fierce backlash that ensued. The White House this was before email, obviously, so the White House was inundated by, I think, hundreds of thousands of outrage telegrams. There were immediate sort of organizing efforts to resist the ruling, and eventually the IRS walked it back. So that was one key moment. The other key moment was he convened a presidential Council on American Families, which included, a pronounced sort of feminist presence. And this also hit at, the whole sort of family values stable of concerns on the right. A lot of right-wing evangelicals took that as a very personal affront. And so within the next election cycle in 1980, evangelicals broke very strongly for Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
And that sort of, and Ronald Reagan was not unlike Donald Trump, I guess once divorced as opposed to twice, but not a paragon of family values and an infrequent churchgoer at best. So there was this decoupling of the idea of personal character as evinced in a leader's conduct from what he would deliver for the evangelical demographic. So, and that became the story.
Interesting. So that you think is like the derivation of this whole, why evangelicals seem to be able to support Donald Trump, who is quite possibly the most morally corrupt human being in public life we've seen in our lifetime.
And, to an overwhelm, I think it's I need to double check the exact numbers, but it was north of 85% evangelical support in the recent election. So, yeah, it's a very different, and there have been complicated theological rejiggerings to kind of make the idea of someone like Trump palatable. A popular motif is that he's a Lazarus figure, referring back to a Persian leader who was not of the faith, but who helped preserve the Jewish temple. There are, lots of very complicated efforts to square this particular circle. But,
I've even read things along the lines of, hate the sin, not the sinner, and, just because he has sinned doesn't mean he is incapable of redemption, or I don't know.
We've seen this exact dynamic play out yesterday in Pete Hegseth's hearings to be confirmed as defense secretary. He, like Trump, has a confirmed history of sexual assault and, or alleged, I should stipulate, sexual assault. And, adultery, drinking on the job when he was at Fox News, all kinds of financial irregularities. And he just sort of was able to get up and say, well, that's the old me. I'm a new man. So, yeah, this is, this reasoning now stretches far beyond Jimmy Carter, far beyond Ronald Reagan, far beyond the person of Donald Trump. It's just, a transactional vision of power in which, and evangelicals have got a lot out of this bargain. They got the Dobbs decision. They got, the U.S. Embassy moved to Jerusalem under Trump. They got all sorts of other everything from tax breaks to prominent appointments. So, yeah, this is what evangelical faith looks like in the aftermath of the Carter moment.
So the guy who's selling Bibles that also contain country music song lyrics, that is if you don't want to buy the high-top tennis shoes, this is...
Or perfume.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
it's...
And, it is sort of something that a satirist would dream up, and you would sort of read it and think it wasn't believable, but here we are.
Here we are. Chris, we need to, I don't want to start on a new topic. You've written so many incredible articles. I don't want to start on a new topic and then have to take a break. So Lady B, let's take a break right now. Chris Lehman and I, he's the D.C. bureau chief and columnist for The Nation magazine. We'll be right back with more of his writing after this.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, Saturdays at 1 p.m.
I'm thankful, really, that anyone could feel they could call into this show and share their real despair and anger. I am. I can only hope that we can get past the disappointment and the anger with each other to once again focus on these longer-term and very large fights.
The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, Saturdays at 1 p.m.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
With me right now is Chris Lehman, who's the D.C. bureau chief and columnist for The Nation magazine. He has been writing an awful lot recently, not surprisingly, about Donald Trump. And Chris, rather than focusing on one of your articles, I'm going to just kind of ask you some general questions so you can pick and choose the things you've written from various posts. First and foremost, what do you think we will initially get in the first few days of the new Trump administration?
Well, he, campaigned on mass deportation, and there's a bill moving through Congress now that would permit federal authorities to deport immigrants who aren't simply charged with crimes, and not violent crimes. That can be minor things like theft.
Yeah,
and,
that's the Laken bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, and people are, like Dick Durbin came out recently in opposition to that, because any immigrant who commits a crime can be, should be deported. But what the Laken bill does is, let's say you're just accused of something. You're accused of, shoplifting. You can be detained and deported. What if you're not guilty? What if you didn't do it? What if it was a case of mistaken identity? Too bad. You're gone.
It's a complete violation of basic protections of equal protection under the law. So I think you can look to that, and Stephen Miller, the big anti-immigrant. I
like to call him the racist in chief.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to be diplomatic. I don't know why,
no. Leave that undiplomatic stuff to me.
Yeah, and he is, assuming an even bigger role in the second Trump administration. So I definitely would look for very rapid movement on deportations. There are a lot of sort of things he's going to do to placate his billionaire donors, including his new first buddy, so-called Elon Musk. He's probably going to issue an executive order to loosen regulations on cryptocurrency, which has become a new hobby horse.
Please explain to me. Cryptocurrency to me is fake. It's fake money. It's like, I have 5,000 cryptocurrency. What do I have? I've got nothing.
Pretty much. I think, it's an instrument of pure speculation and contributes nothing to the productive economy. And Trump, after, in 2021, he actually called cryptocurrency a scam, but he is a serial scammer himself. And so he's come around and is actually involved in a crypto issue himself, which is one of his many conflicts of interest. So he's also been talking about creating a strategic reserve of cryptocurrency. The theory being that, it will just continually appreciate in value, and you can start paying off the national debt with the proceeds, which is, delusional, and it's never going to happen. And it was clear immediately after the announcement, crypto values soared on the news, which is not something you want for a stable currency that's supposed to be a shield against inflation. Crypto is notoriously volatile, and it is.
I don't think stability is a word we're going to be using often in the next 4 years.
Exactly. So, we're seeing now in the, confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill that are happening all this week, what we can expect. I mentioned Pete Hegseth, Pamela Bondi, Trump's nominee for Attorney General, is testifying today, and she significantly did not respond to questions about whether the 2020 election was decided fairly in Joe Biden's favor. So you have an election denier teed up to be Attorney General. You have Kash Patel, who is, proudly brandishes a personal enemies list, nominated to be FBI director. What could possibly go wrong there? It's going to be, and of course I mentioned Elon Musk, who has got this sort of, rolling mission under the Department of Government Efficiency to hack away at federal spending. He also possesses massive government contracts and conflicts of interest. So it's going to be, corruption on a scale that I don't think most Americans are really prepared to see. I think.
But Chris, his first administration was corrupt. Do you remember? I had willfully forgotten how many of his cabinet members not only had to resign, but resigned as the case was being referred to the Justice Department for potential criminal prosecution, which, of course, Bill Barr ducked out on every time so that we didn't get those criminal prosecutions. But there was wild corruption to the point where I'm not even sure it could be worse.
Oh, as they say, there is no
why did I
bottom.
say that, Chris? Of course it can always be worse. I should know better than that.
Yeah, no, I think we are seeing, Musk. I think there are 13 billionaires all told in Trump's administration. Administration in waiting, I should say, since they're still being confirmed. And we've never seen anything like this in American history. So it is, there are ample, as I was saying, conflicts of interest. There's, just sort of the brute fact that, I think a lot of people who voted for Trump thought, we're going to get inflation down and, basic prosperity will be more widespread. And it is not going to be that at all, especially Trump's tariffs are very regressive and will hit consumer pocketbooks to the tune of roughly $1,900 per family. So it's going to be a rude awakening.
I'm trying very hard to find words that aren't rude to describe the people who voted for Donald Trump. But because he's not an unknown quantity. He was in the White House before. He behaved badly. He put us at risk. He was corrupt. So do we have such a short memory 4 years later? Hey, that's the guy to fix everything. Yeah. I mean, I think the kindest word I can come up with is what? Ill-informed voters? I don't understand it. Do you have any insight into how, in 4 short years, we could have forgotten what this guy's like?
Well, I think there is a certain, amnesia is sort of a chronic condition of American culture, and I think and I think to be fair, there have been ample Democratic miscalls. I think it was a mistake for Biden to run for a second term. His, basic capability to serve as president came into question, and then the Democratic Party was sort of plunged into this unprecedented crisis and wound up running Kamala Harris as a conventional centrist candidate in an election where that simply was not going to fly with voters. There is a lot of discontent. And Trump is very good at making it seem like he's the great leader who can solve everything, and the rest of the system is irredeemably corrupt, and he's your only chance, which is part of why evangelicals fall in line in such astonishing numbers behind him. It is, a basic narrative of strongman, heroism. And, the thing that's difficult to, sort of keep in mind amid all the chaos that's going to come is that, people, this is me trying to be as sympathetic as I can to the median Trump voter. I think people have a legitimate sense that things are not being run well, and the Democrats were running as a sort of status quo party. And I don't think they learned the lesson from 2016, which, that is exactly the campaign that Hillary Clinton ran. She ran as the most credentialed inside person ever to run for president in our history. And that was another, season of voter discontent. And the Democrats didn't understand it. And it's a little frustrating to see the same dynamic play out 8 years later. It's difficult to...
Some people are saying that, rather than offer resistance at every turn, that maybe Democrats should let Donald Trump enact some of these policies. Maybe let him build the detention camp in Texas. Maybe let this start to happen. Let people see what they voted for. What do you think? Is that too cruel? I mean, it is, but, on the one hand, it's like he didn't just get the Electoral College. He got the popular vote. So this is apparently what people want. So maybe we should let it happen. And if I hear one more interview where somebody says it's not going to happen to me because I'm a good immigrant, I think my head is going to explode.
I know, it's absolutely true. And that is why, Democrats should have been much more principled on immigration generally. Harris ran on, basically Trump had killed the Republican bill, which was draconian in a lot of terrible ways. And, she vowed to sign that into law. And, we saw in the House, I think 38 Democrats voted for the Lake and Riley bill, and it looks like it's going to pass through the Senate with a lot of Democratic support. And
do you think that's because those Democrats, when they face re-election, don't want a Republican challenger to be able to accuse them of being soft on immigration?
It's that, but that itself is indicative of, I think, an unwillingness on the part of Democrats to fight for principle. And I'm weary of it. I think, you need to take basic stands when something like equal protection is being mangled in the interests of an agenda that targets, people who are either undocumented or simply, perceived as threats because they come from a different culture or ethnic background. We saw during the whole Springfield, Ohio, panic about Haitian immigrants eating pets, it's all part of the broader effort to sort of stoke resentments and divide the population against itself while billionaires clean up. And I think, Democrats in sort of saying, we just want to tiptoe around this issue and not face, pushback, they allow it to fester. They allow it to get worse. They allow Stephen Miller to become, sort of the domestic policy czar in a second Trump administration. So, I think Democrats have to, they may face harsh pushback in election cycles, but I got news for you. That is just politics, You have to face pushback, and you have to learn the lessons from your failures, which is the big Democratic sin in my view.
Yeah. Chris, we're out of time. I would love to have a discussion with you again in the very near future. This has really been enjoyable. I hope you'll come back.
I'm a former Chicagoan. I love the city. I'm happy to be on anytime.
Wonderful, wonderful. Chris Lehman, D.C. Bureau Chief and columnist for The Nation magazine. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
As those of you who listen to this show regularly know, I love talking with people who have a real depth of experience when it comes to politics and political science, which is why I invite so many professors of political science to join me on the radio. Today, that person is Hari Hahn, who is a professor of political science at Johns Hopkins University and is an expert on things like partisanship, partisan control of the federal government. How does somebody win? How does political power shift? These are all the things that we love to talk about and things that I love to learn more about. And I am so pleased to be able to have that discussion today. Hari, so wonderful to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, me too. Okay, explain to me, how did Trump win and how can we keep him from ever being a part of political life ever again? Let's start with the small stuff. What do you say? Let's start small.
Let's start with a simple question. Well, it's obviously, I think one of the things that I have found really interesting from looking at all the election results that have come out is there's one way in which you can look at the data and say this was totally predictable, that there's been an anti-incumbent trend in democracies all over the world and that Biden was just, part of that trend in every way. But I think there are other ways to look at the data to say, I think there's a sign of some real patterns that potentially are unique to American politics, but certainly are unique historically within America to this political time period. And what I mean by that is this idea that we've had more instability in partisan control of our federal government in the 21st century than we have in any other period in American history. And I think what that tells us is that neither political party is really delivering what people want. And I think increasingly more and more people are getting fed up. They feel like they're part of a game, like they're pawns in a game that someone else is controlling. And so they keep kicking whoever's in charge of that game out of office. That's how we see that partisan control shifting back and forth.
I've also read that there was this whole anti-incumbent sentiment, particularly in this last election. If you are running like Kamala Harris did for the presidency, and this is something that your people acknowledge is happening, is there any way to circumvent it? Is there any way to still get elected, even if you are not the incumbent, but you represent the incumbent position?
Yeah, I mean, so my general sense is that, for the most part, there are sort of big macro trends that are out of the control of any candidate that govern each election. But that when you have a situation like what we have in the United States, where you have a very divided country and elections are decided on the margins, then what really can shift things at the margin is the extent to which, 100,000 voters here and there in certain counties and certain battleground states in the United States feel like they have a relationship where they can have a more nuanced relationship with the candidate than or the party than they might just get from the news, And so to me, the mistake that the Democrats made is they let themselves be subject to these broad global trends like the anti-incumbent trend that we saw, and they didn't focus enough on having a year-round, on-the-ground presence in the communities and in the lives of people who had actually decide the election.
I've heard that from Democratic strategists before, that in the not-too-distant past, Democrats had a big presence, particularly in rural areas, in rural America. And for whatever reason, that presence was deemed, I don't know, not worthwhile, too expensive. Let's focus all of our resources in the urban areas. I'm not sure what happened, but I've heard people for the last 2 or 3 years say that if Democrats want to win this particular set of blue-collar voters back, they have to be there 24/7, day in and day out as part of these people's lives. You can't just drop in 6 weeks before an election and walk around going, our candidate is best, so you should vote for us.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, especially if you sort of say, let's start from the position that our candidate is facing headwinds, right? These headwinds are these anti-incumbent trends, the sort of state of the economy, people's perceptions about inflation, all of these different kind of things that are running up against Kamala Harris. Then you're not going to beat those headwinds by another tweet or a really good commercial or an ad buy or something like that. You're going to beat those headwinds by real neighbors having conversations with neighbors, right? By people who I trust in my church coming and saying, hey, you know what, you may have read this in the news, but let me tell you why I, your friend and neighbor, think that, Harris is someone who I'm going to support. And, there's data after data point that's telling us that those kind of human-to-human conversations are the way in which you break out of these trends that may not be going in your favor. And, and so if I were to give a message to, the Democratic Party for the next election, it would be that we should start investing in those kinds of institutions and relationships now to set ourselves up for the next election.
And do you think that this anti-incumbent trend will continue. And part of the reason I'm asking is that a lot of times when we get a new president and that president has power in both houses of Congress, frequently in the midterm elections, the balance of power changes. People are like, ooh, you didn't do a very good job. Let's vote the other guys back in. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think, and that's what I mean by the kind of unstable majorities that we see in the 21st century. If we look at previous periods of polarization, of high polarization in American politics, the previous period that had the highest polarization before the 21st century was like the turn of the 20th century, so the 1800s leading into the early 1900s. And basically it was like the American parties are really, really polarized, and then it wasn't until you had the Great Depression and the New Deal come along where you had one party that was able to establish a stable majority that lasted, in that case, for 4 terms of presidential control. And one thing that, I sort of tell my students all the time is, there's a guy named Wendell Willkie who most people haven't heard of, but he was the presidential candidate the Republicans ran 4 times before they realized that the Democrats had captured the public imagination, and that most Americans had kind of accepted the broad outlines of the New Deal. And I think right now we're in a situation where neither party has captured a stable majority of the American public. And so, yes, I would totally expect that we would see this kind of return, backlash to, unified Republican control in the next midterm election. But I think it'll keep flip-flopping back and forth until you see one party able to establish that broad base. And I think that broad base is only going to come through some combination of both an air game and a ground game. And right now the Democrats are over-investing in the air game and not enough in the ground game.
Mm-hmm. I do remember the name Wendell Willkie. I did not realize that they nominated him 4 different times. My goodness, a much more patient era, I guess.
Well, it's so funny because it's like, if you imagine, I'm impressed that you've heard of him because so many of my students at least have never even heard of him. But that's what it takes for a party to realize, oh, we really are in the minority here. It takes, 4 election cycles before the Republicans are like, wow, we have to accept the broad outlines of the New Deal. This is a realignment.
Yeah, so I just don't think Wendell Willkie's going to do it. Let's not nominate him a 5th time.
Yeah, finally. I know, exactly. After 16 years of trying.
Yeah. We need to take a real quick break. I'm talking to political science professor Hari Han from Johns Hopkins University. We're going to continue this discussion right after a break.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Johns Hopkins University political science professor Hari Han. And, you just were talking a second ago about shifting political winds and the party who is able to really touch base with all kinds of voters and understand them and support them is the political party that will emerge victorious. But is it possible that we no longer are capable of that kind of stability with social media and disinformation and lies, blatant lies, and politicians with seemingly no real character or love of country? Is it possible that that is no longer something we're capable of, that kind of stability and consistency?
So it's definitely possible. The future is very uncertain, so I'm not sure. Let me give you some counterpoints to that narrative, which I think is, it's very possible, right? I don't actually really know. But here are some counterpoints. One of the things that I've had the privilege of doing over the past few years is doing a lot of research with people who are organizing around racial justice within evangelical megachurches in America. And the church that I've worked most closely with is the 3rd largest megachurch in America. It's based in Cincinnati, Ohio. it's a church that gets 35,000 people to show up every week. Right. So it has a scale that is bigger than any of our other political organizations. It's, it's rivaled only by the NFL, right, to get that many people to show up every week. And the thing that I didn't know before I started doing this work is that, the average megachurch in America has grown by 34% in the last period that we have data. Church attendance has gotten so skewed towards these megachurches that the top 9% of churches by size contains 50% of the church-going population in America. Right? So if you hear data about how people are leaving organized religion, it's true for the average church, but they're flocking towards these megachurches. And when you dig into these megachurches, what I found is that, what they have is they're able to create this kind of like cellular structure that looks like a honeycomb, so that even though I'm part of a 35,000 person church, I feel like there's a group of people that I'm in deep relationship with. So my relationship to the church can be
They
small
feel that kind of
big.
Connection. I've never attended a mega church service. I don't understand the appeal, but it seems surprising to me that somebody going to church with, 5,000 of their closest friends would really feel that they have that special connection with them.
Yeah, that's what's crazy is so these churches operate on what you might call like a cellular structure. And so the idea is that even if people are attending a church that has 5,000 people or 35,000 people in it or whatever, most of them belong to these self-organized small groups that are basically kind of little crucibles of small d democracy, where people learn the habits of being in deep relationship with people who are different from them. They learn how to build community. They learn how to do, all the things all the kind of habits of democracy that we want people to have. And these kind of spaces are growing, which I think it's data points like that give me the sense that people are hungry for a kind of connection that is different from what they're getting from social media and other things. But right now, the political parties aren't providing it, so people are finding it elsewhere.
I know this is not quite, talking about politics, but I would love to learn more about your observations of these megachurches. What is it that the pastors are just so charismatic that they draw all these people in? They know how to woo a crowd. They know how to get people stirred up. Is it the person at the podium that is creating this kind of feeling, or is it something else?
So I think it's a combination of things. So it is true that this church that I studied, called the Crossroads Church, which is a 35,000 person church, they have a real emphasis on what they call culturally current communication, right? So they're more focused on being hip than they are on being holy, essentially, right? So they, the services are a multimedia affair. They have a full band on stage. The music is really good. It's got lights and, all that kind of thing. So it is true that draws people in. But what I find is that mega churches have this kind of motto where they want to create like a wraparound set of services in people's lives. So it's not just that people show up on Sunday for an hour, but it's that people's lives are integrated in with the church. So they have like free co-working spaces with free coffee, and it's good coffee and free Wi-Fi. They have childcare available kind of throughout the week, so that parents can come and take part in church activities and whatever way they might want. They have these small groups organized around everything from a Bible study to like people who want to go rock climbing on Friday nights or something like that. And so it's not just that people are being drawn to these communities, I think, because of the services, but it's really because they're replacing the kind of community that a lot of people feel like they've gotten, has been lost in other ways.
So it's almost offering them a community center, like a rec center. Oh, come here and learn how to ice skate kind of a thing.
Yeah. There's this motto that some of these mega churches that I've worked with have. And I should qualify, by the way, I myself am not evangelical. And so this is a community that I get to know over time through this research. And, they sort of have this motto, we do life together. Right. So the idea is that you don't just come for once a week on Sunday, but you come, we do life together. We're a community, and so that means that when things are hard, we're going to come through for you. But it also means that, they provided tax advice, they provide marriage counseling. It's everything.
It's interesting that you are saying this, because I've been reading, especially in the last year, about how one of the things that people say has changed Americans is our lack of connections. We're not as involved in our communities as we once were. I mean, the number of people who, volunteer for an organization, the number of people who do things outside of their own little family circles is so small. And those lack of, like if you volunteer in your community, you feel a sense of responsibility, of ownership. And if you're not involved in all that, you don't necessarily. And they talk about all of those connections disappearing as one of the main reasons for the big disaffection that people seem to be feeling. What you're explaining, what people get with megachurches, makes perfect sense when you think of it in those terms. People looking for community and connections and wanting to be a bigger part of their own lives, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I always kind of think about is the idea that, like we go to the gym because we're not born, with the muscle strength that we need to be healthy individuals, right? Mm-hmm. And just like people need gyms for their physical muscles, we need gyms for our democracy muscles, right? Like people are not born with the muscles they need to make democracy work. And so we need places to go and practice, like being in a relationship with people who are different from us, and hanging out with strangers, and learning how to work with each other to solve problems together. And as people have withdrawn from engaging in their community in the ways that you've talked about, and as the kind of supply of those sorts of opportunities have disappeared, then we're essentially kind of taking away the gyms that people need to develop their democracy muscles. And megachurches are one of the few institutions that still exist that provide them at scale, but we're seeing fewer and fewer of those in lots of other domains, and it's a real challenge.
Is there a non-religious equivalent to that kind of outreach, that kind of offering?
Yeah, I mean, actually, at Hopkins, we did this project that we called, Mapping the Modern Agora. Like, we were trying to figure out, what are the kind of modern spaces where people go to find this kind of connection. And I think we found in something like, I don't have exact numbers off the top of my head, but roughly, like in something like 80% of counties in America, the top providers of these sorts of democracy gyms are faith institutions, social fraternal organizations, and hobby and recreational organizations, right? So it's things like everything from actual sororities and fraternities to ethnic clubs to Rotary clubs to bridge players of Baltimore, fly fishermen of western Wisconsin. Like it's the sort of social recreational places where people come together that are providing those kinds of opportunities that faith institutions also provide.
As you were going through all that, I'm sitting here thinking, I don't have any of that. I'm the perfect example for the person who doesn't have any of those connections. Though I suppose I do have the radio show, so I am, connected to the larger world through my microphone. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of the people I know. Do they belong to any kind of hobby groups or social groups? And I can't think of a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that the atrophy of that, I think, leads to the kind of situation that we started our conversation with, where, so then an election comes along and people are like, what is the Democratic Party? Like, I don't know anything about it. It means nothing in my life. All it is a label, right, that I hear about in the news, and let's kick the bums out, And so if it's just this sort of abstract label, then there's no nuance or relationship that anchors people's image of that. So it's really hard to beat any kind of headwinds that you might face. And so, the pattern that you're describing about, not what we've seen in the data is that people tend to be closer to in their primary relationships. So people's families, the relationship between parents and children tends to be closer now than it was a generation ago. And people tend to have deeper relationships with like their media environment and their media ecosystem because of the way in which that media ecosystem has changed over time. But it's that middle tier, the people that we run into in the grocery store, the kind of people that you might see at the YMCA, the people you see in your church. That middle tier is what's really atrophied. But that middle tier is where you learn a lot of the habits of democracy. You learn tolerance, you build relationships. You feel embedded in a place.
When you did this study of the modern agora, what did you find motivated people to reach out and join these groups? I know some people are natural extroverts, so let's just set those people aside because they're gonna, they're gonna be out and about no matter what. But what were some of the other things that motivated people to say join the library knitting group or something like that?
Yeah. So basically, what we have found is, and the thing that I always say when I'm talking to different groups who are thinking about this question, like how do we bring people in, is that you kind of want lots of different doorways into a group because the reasons why people might show up the first time are really variable, right? So it could be anything from like a working woman who had her first baby and is staying at home and then wants to meet a new community, or someone who just retired and has more free time, to someone who just moved or whatever. All these different kind of things can create an openness where people begin to seek something out, or maybe they need tax advice, right? And they happen to find it in a certain place. But the harder question is if you have lots of open doors, then people will show up. The harder question is how do you keep them there once they're there? And one of the real lessons that I learned from doing some of this work is that the mistake a lot of organizations make is that they put belief before belonging, but the organizations that are most effective put belonging before belief.
Explain what you mean by that, if you would.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of political organizations that I've been a part of or that I've, been invited to, where implicitly the idea is first you have to show that you agree with us before we welcome you into our community. So I remember I went to the meeting of an environmental organization, and someone came up to me and asked me how I offset my carbon, for the way in which I got there. And then immediately, and I am, this is something that I ideal, it's very consistent with my political views, but it made me feel really alienated that I couldn't give a good answer to that question, right? So it immediately made me feel like, I'm kind of an outsider here. And so there are both formal and informal ways that we make people feel kind of unwelcome. And then what happens is those people don't come back the next time. Right. And that's what I mean by putting belief before belonging. This church that I was describing in Cincinnati, they had this motto, belonging comes before belief. And so the idea is that, look, we're a church, but you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in any God. You certainly don't have to believe in our God. You still are welcome in our community. And they had this kind of ethos of radical hospitality. So even people who are like, I hate church, it's not for me, would come in and be like, but it's so fun, and I love the free coffee, and these people are so nice. And, and so it creates this social community of belonging. They're not trying to manipulate people because they're really clear, look, we're a church. We're trying to bring you into relationship with God. So they're not, trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. But there is this ethos of kind of social connections that is really different in these kinds of organizations.
So when you were asked how you offset your carbon footprint, did you say, well, I try to only use my private jet every other week?
Yeah, exactly. I try to keep it on the ground once a week, so twice, 2 weeks out of the month.
I don't do the private jet unless it's a trip of at least 30 minutes.
Exactly. Less than 30 minutes, and, I might consider using my Range Rover.
Yeah. And, the other thing is a question of being welcoming. There was a group that I was considering being a part of, and I went to one of their meetings. And unfortunately, my partner, Ray, is the extrovert in this couple. And usually when I go with him, he does all the talking. But he was unavailable that night, and I really was intrigued by the group, so I went by myself. And I felt like everybody there either was there with a friend or they all knew each other. Nobody came up to me and said, until I was ready and beginning to walk out when I put my coat on and somebody came over to me and introduced themselves, and it was, I understand, sometimes you go someplace and everybody there does know everybody else, but it was, I was looking for a familiar face or even somebody who was by themselves who I could go up to.
Yeah, no, I've had the same experience. And then, so then what happens when I have an experience like that? Well, the next time I'm thinking about going to a meeting of that group and I think, well, I could stay home and watch Netflix, or I could go and stand around by myself in the corner. I sort of think, well, I think I'd rather stay home and watch Netflix, to be honest, and so, I think this idea of trying to think about how can we create, an opportunity for people to feel connected to each other, because then that's how they begin to feel connected to, the political system, to our society, to our communities, and so on.
Yeah. We're out of time. We've got to get to the news. This is so fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I've really enjoyed this conversation immensely.
Oh, I'm really grateful for the chance, and it was really fun to talk.
We are going to take a break for news, and we will be back with more after this. Thank you, Hari Han, political science professor at Johns Hopkins University.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Hey, Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's Progressive Talk from TuneIn.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
I want somebody who's passionate. I want somebody who can talk to people like a real person, who can make people feel things, who can make people want to follow them.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
I'd like to hear somebody like that, too. Maybe we can just keep looking and maybe find them. Or maybe it will turn out to be Anders Croy, who is my guest and the communications director at Florida Watch, who reports on all things Ron DeSantis and Florida. Anders, how are you?
Oh, good afternoon, Joan. I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm pretty good, all things considered. I sort of feel, even as chaotic as the last few weeks have been, I sort of feel like this might just be the calm before the storm. And so I'm a little anxious as to what next week will bring after the inauguration of President Trump. Hey, is your governor, Ron DeSantis, is he planning to attend the inauguration? I know he was potentially being floated to be the head of the DOD if Hegseth stepped back, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So what's going on with Ron and Don?
I'm not sure if the governor is planning to attend the inauguration. I do know that he went golfing with the incoming president yesterday. And it appears what they he did, yes, down in South Florida. It appears that what they mostly discussed was how he can best help the incoming president with his family separation plan, how they can sort of rip opportunities for dreamers here in the state of Florida away under a special session that the governor is trying to call here for later this month.
Tell me about that. Please give me more details.
So earlier this week, the governor announced on Monday that he would be calling a special session the week of the 27th, with the focuses being on immigration, reforms to condo laws here in the state, hurricane relief, as well as reforming the ballot initiative process. The ballot initiatives, obviously, that were big here in Florida the last election cycle, the governor fought against, being the Reproductive Freedom Amendment as well as a marijuana legalization amendment. But the governor made it pretty clear today that the thing that he is really focused on, as he held a press conference down in the Polk County area here in the state, is the immigration portion of things. The governor outlined a slew of proposals that will do nothing to actually fix our broken immigration system and really only serve to advance a political agenda that will separate families and harm dreamers who are willing to work hard and help build our economy after being educated here in our state. One of the proposals that he would like taken up would repeal in-state tuition for undocumented students here in the state, which, by the way, was a proposal that was sponsored and passed by his current lieutenant governor, Jeanette Nunez, more than a decade ago. That ensures that when Florida spends public tax dollars to educate these students, they are able to go to college here and build a better life for themselves, for their families, and contribute to our economy here in the state. But a lot of these other proposals seem more just trying to get in line with this largest deportation program that's going to ever be put in place. The governor mentioned that he has been talking to the incoming president about some of these proposals, what he expects as part of the executive orders that are going to be signed on the first day that Trump takes office. And there's a lot of things in here that are really scary. The governor earlier this week didn't really say it again today, but has threatened to remove local officials if they are not complying with some of these immigration directives that are going to be coming out of the federal government. As we know here in Florida, the governor has a history of removing elected officials who disagree with him politically. So sheriffs in places who, by the way, a Republican sheriff in Miami-Dade County, sheriffs in Broward County, in Central Florida here in the state, Orange County, have said that they will not work with the federal government. They are not people who are in charge of enforcing immigration law. And the governor is sort of putting them on notice that he might remove them from office. It's really more of that authoritarian playbook that we've seen from Governor Ron DeSantis that is really going to be put on steroids now that that sort of Floridification of the country is coming in 5 days.
I've heard that before, that Ron DeSantis has removed people or threatened to remove people. I'm always surprised by that he has that kind of power. Is that something that's unique to Florida, that he can say, I'm sheriff of Miami-Dade County, I don't like you. I'm firing you? Because I'm not so sure J.B. Pritzker has that kind of power to get rid of all these folks in Illinois if they disagree with him. So is that something Florida specific, or does that exist in other states and just simply never get utilized?
I'm not sure how widespread the power is. The way it works is that here in Florida, under our Constitution, the governor has the power to remove local officials who usually have committed a crime or have committed malfeasance. Drunkenness is actually in there. That's how old this power is in our Constitution. But in the past, Florida governors have really only used this when local elected officials have been charged or convicted with crimes. Now, in 2022, the governor removed the duly elected state attorney in Hillsborough County for disagreeing with him politically. The state attorney down there had said that, he disagreed with moves that were happening when it came to restricting abortion rights here in the state. And then about a year later, he removed the duly elected state attorney in Orange and Osceola County in Central Florida for what he said was refusing to enforce the law, which is really prosecutorial discretion. Has used these powers in an unprecedented way, where it's really become, if you disagree politically or have an ideological disagreement, you're now removed from office. Under our Constitution, the state Senate has the ability to actually reinstate these local officials, but our Republican legislature here, which is a supermajority Republican legislature, has not really shown the ability to stand up to the governor, although that did change a little bit this week. The incoming Senate president, the new Speaker of the House, actually pushed back on this call for the special session that the governor made. So I think it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they're going to allow him to continue to have that unchecked power going forward. But when you think about an incoming Trump administration and you think about the discretion of United States attorneys nationwide, it seems very, very clear that that's going to be the same playbook when it comes to whether or not these people are given the latitude to enforce the law in the way that's right for their local communities. They'll probably just be removed in the same way that Ron DeSantis has done that here in the state of Florida.
The person who, the Senate leader who stood up to him or pushed back a little bit, is he a Republican or a Democrat? And what sort of shape did that take? Was it hell no, we're not coming back into session? Or, that's really probably something we should talk about. What was it, a firm rebuttal or was it a soft rebuttal? And did it come from a fellow Republican?
It did come from fellow Republicans. The new Senate president, the new Speaker of the Florida House are both Republicans. They pushed back pretty strongly against this special session that the governor is calling. They said that they weren't, going to come here with just fragments of ideas. The way that it normally works is when we have a special session in the state of Florida, the governor, the legislative leadership has sort of agreed on what the frameworks of that are, of what the legislation that will be considered will be. That has not been the case here. There's a lot of disagreement between the governor, between legislative leaders on issues, especially when it comes to the condo reforms here in the state of Florida, which has been a big issue ever since the Surfside Tower collapse a few years ago and an unfortunate loss of life that happened from that. But they sort of, for the first time that we have seen in many years when Ron DeSantis has been in governor, push back against him doing this. You know, in the past, the governor had called special sessions without agreements from leadership, and they had sort of just acquiesced to his demands. This happened around his battle with Disney a couple years ago. But this time it remains to be seen whether that backbone is going to hold. Incoming President Trump yesterday actually tweeted in support of this special session. The House Speaker today seemed to back off a little bit. So we'll see whether or not they have the backbone to follow through on opposing the governor. But for right now, there seems to be a little bit of a weakening of the power of Ron DeSantis from what it had been at the peak of his sort of conservative, almost quasi-celebrity that he had developed before his absolutely disastrous run for the presidency a couple years ago.
Well, he did have a disastrous run, and he can't run for governor again. I mean, I know it's not, his term doesn't end, you know, really quickly, but he is a lame duck. Is that, do you think, why people are feeling that they are not risking quite as much by standing up to him?
I think that's certainly playing a role in this. As you mentioned, the governor is term limited out of office in 2026, so there's not as long of a runway to deal with his wrath. But a lot of that authoritarianism that the governor has put in place over the last couple of years has really rubbed lawmakers, even Republican lawmakers, the wrong way. He has taken a lot of great pleasure, even at one point calling a press conference with the president of the Senate at the time and the House Speaker, where he highlighted the projects that were in the state budget of theirs that he was vetoing that day. So right now there's certainly still a fear of what Ron DeSantis will do with that veto power, with his little bit of legislative power that he still has left. But the fact of the matter is that the governor was not as successful last election cycle when it came to playing in local elections, whether that was school board or some state House and state Senate primaries here in the state. And I think there's a little bit of blood in the water about people who have been really pushed around the last couple of years, finally wanting to stand up and say, hey, the legislative branch is different from the executive branch, and we have our own priorities, and it's time you recognize that we're on the same footing as you.
This is fascinating. So much more I want to talk to Anders Croy about. He's the communications director at Florida Watch. I want to talk about Laura Trump. I want to talk about Matt Gaetz. I want to talk more about Ron DeSantis. Let's take a quick break and come back with all that.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone. Dive deeper into the heart of the news and stories at WCPT 820 and across the Midwest by checking out our website, heartlandsignal.com.
It's the coverage I can count on every time.
For the latest news updates, in-depth analysis, compelling stories, comprehensive election coverage, live streams, and thought-provoking opinions, head to heartlandsignal.com.
When I need to know, they're there.
They keep me informed and updated wherever I am.
Stay informed with WCPT 820, your go-to source for where facts matter.
WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
Hey, the Capitol Fools are coming to North Shore Center for the Performing Arts in Skokie. February 1st, Saturday, there's 2 shows. February 2nd, Sunday, there's an evening show, 3 shows all together. And right now, if you are the second caller, we're going to give you a pair of tickets to see the Capitol Fools. 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. This is a group that takes the news of the day and does these really funny skits and creates these really funny songs. It is a delightful evening. And as a matter of fact, Saturday for the evening performance, February 1st, I believe it's at 7, I'm going to be with the WCPT table in the lobby, and I will be introducing the Capitol Fools that night. So I really hope that if you are there Saturday night, February 1st, you stop by and say hello. Remember, let's see, I'm going to be giving away, today's what, Wednesday? I'm sorry. Thursday and Friday, I'm also giving away 2 tickets. So remember, you have to be 18 years old, live in the greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana, Southern Wisconsin area. 1 entry per person, 1 winner per household. Void where prohibited by law. Listeners may only win or qualify to win once every 30 days. Complete rules on our website, WCPT820.com. Find and click the contest tab.
This is Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm speaking with Anders Croy, who's the communications director at Florida Watch. There are other topics I want to get to, but let's talk a little bit more about Ron DeSantis. Anders, you know, they say in political life, there are no friends, there are no enemies, there are only interests, diverging interests and aligned interests. Because there is clearly no love lost between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. It has to be that they're getting something from one another. Don't you agree?
I think what the governor is trying to get out of this relationship is to extend his political life. We mentioned earlier the governor had a disastrous run for president in 2023, dropped out in early 2024, and has been trying to get back into the good graces of Donald Trump. I think when you're Donald Trump, what you're looking at is that you actually need a lot of the expertise of what's happened in Florida under Ron DeSantis. And that's because what's been happening here is a warning to the rest of the nation about what they can expect under the incoming Trump administration. Florida has really served as the blueprint for the Project 2025 most extreme proposals that would undermine democracy, attack our freedoms, eliminate abortion access, and roll back action on climate change, LGBTQ plus rights, and workers' rights. So as the governor is trying to rehabilitate his own political standing with a lot of the people who supported the president, Trump is at the same time trying to make sure that he has the people in place to put in place to implement the kind of policies that he has run on that would really restrict the freedoms of people nationwide. And unfortunately, those people are mostly coming from Florida because that is what we have seen happen here. You know, Project 2025 mentioned policies in the state of Florida, I think more than 10 times in the actual document itself. A lot of the people who work for the Heritage Foundation have come from Florida. They are very close with the governor. He just appointed a Heritage Foundation fellow, I believe, to the University of North Florida, or West Florida, School Board of Trustees last week. So I think what you're seeing is a little bit of give and take on both sides, where one person, which is Governor Ron DeSantis, needs a little bit of polishing of his political bona fides as he tries to build a post-governorship political profile in the new Republican Party. And then you have Donald Trump, who needs that expertise to implement the worst aspects of the administration agenda that we expect to be put in place as soon as he takes office next week.
Do you have any insight into the background discussions? Laura Trump made it very clear that she was more than willing to be the senator from Florida appointed by Ron DeSantis to replace Marco Rubio. And, it seemed like it was going to be like a handshake deal between DeSantis and Trump. And it seemed like it and seemed like it. And then all of a sudden we get from Laura Trump, I've been thinking about this, and I don't really think that I want this. And many people said, that was the gracious way of Ron DeSantis letting her take her name out of contention because he clearly told her he was not going to give her that seat. So would Donald Trump have been golfing with him today in an attempt to put Laura back on the playing field, do you think? Or has that ship sailed?
I don't have any specific insights into the discussions that were had on that. I would be incredibly surprised if Laura Trump was back in the running for this. All the indications seem to be that the Senate appointee will be the state's current attorney general, a woman by the name of Ashley Moody, who is as much of a far-right extremist as our current governor, has really and made the point today, actually, at the governor's press conference that the first lawsuit that she had filed against the Biden administration had to do with immigration. So the President Trump will be getting a lackey, someone who will vote with him, who will do his bidding in the United States Senate. And at the end of that, Ron DeSantis will then get to appoint an attorney general to serve out the rest of that term. So I think, the incoming president probably just doesn't really care that much about this issue, except for the fact that he'll be getting a rubber stamp vote, which is what Ashley Moody will be for him, somebody who will continue that agenda of higher costs, fewer freedoms. And the governor, at the end of the day, will get to try to put in place another loyalist in the Florida state cabinet, which, even though the attorney general's position is technically a constitutional office, Ashley Moody has really served as Ron DeSantis' personal attorney, spending millions of taxpayer dollars defending his unconstitutional laws in the court system over the last few years, and even at one point indicating that she thought she worked for Ron DeSantis, not the people's lawyer that she's supposed to be, which I think you're actually going to see with the incoming attorney general, our former attorney general, Pam Bondi, in that same role at the national level for incoming President Trump.
Interesting. And finally, Matt Gaetz, who resigned from Congress, did not get to be even before a committee to talk about being head of the DOJ. Everybody thought he would go back to Congress. He said he's not going back to Congress. And now the rumors are starting to circulate. Well, maybe, just maybe, I'd like to be the next governor of Florida. What are you hearing about that?
I think the expectation here in the state for years had been that Matt Gaetz was going to run for governor one day. As you mentioned, he has recently told a newspaper here, as well as I believe the New York Times mentioned this on his new show on OAN as well, that he is in the process of considering running for governor. The report that came out from the House Ethics Committee is damning. The allegations against former Representative Gaetz should be disqualifying for anyone who's running for any office, much less a statewide office. But this is Florida, and with the support of President Trump, anything is possible. I will say that there is expected to be a pretty spirited Republican primary for governor in 2026. United States Congressman Byron Donalds is expected to throw his hat into the ring. He recently hired President Trump's pollster as part of his political operation. Our current agriculture Secretary Wilton Simpson is expected to jump into that. There may be some other folks who also make a play for that. But I think anything is possible here in the state of Florida. However, I do think if Matt Gaetz were to be the Republican nominee, it would give a real opportunity for Democrats to defeat somebody whose, baggage, I don't think you're even allowed to check that much baggage, no matter how much you pay on an airline.
Anders, I was just going to say, you said in state of Florida, anything is possible. And I was going to say, well, does that include electing a Democrat to the governor's office?
Look, here in Florida, the people who live here, who work here, we're worth the fight. And I think that each one of us will never give up until we have our own freedom to be healthy, prosperous, and safe. We're going to continue to fight. And I think if Republicans continue down this path of extremism, people will reach a breaking point. We've seen that in, places that people think of as red states like Louisiana and Kansas and Kentucky. When there is that massive overreach, when candidates are put forward who are so abhorrent to the general election electorate, that anything can happen. I think there's a lot of really good Democrats here in Florida who are fighting very hard every single day for working people and for the values of lowering costs, increasing freedoms, and higher wages. That once people hear that contrast between what the Republicans are going to put up and what the Democrats are going to be talking about, anything is possible. And I know we'll continue to fight really, really hard to make sure that the people of Florida get the representation that they deserve.
Anders, I really admire you. I mean, here I am sitting in a blue state with, a governor who's already said to Trump, you want to come after my state, you come through me. And, I feel nervous about the next 4 years, but at least I know I'm in a safe space. How hard it must be to be in a state like Florida, where you have a very, very MAGA state legislature and governor, and I don't know how you do it. Where do you find your hope? Maybe it's something that the rest of us need to know about, because you're doing great work.
I appreciate that. I'm a sixth-generation Floridian, Joan, so my folks were here long before Republicans were in charge, and I think hopefully we'll be here long after. So we'll keep trying to make the state better for every single Floridian.
I love talking to you, Anders. Thank you for being here again. Anders Croy is the communications director at Florida Watch. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
You know, I'm not a business traveler. WCPT does not send me all around the country to, like Stephanie Miller, put on shows, live shows. No, we don't do that here. But I still love to read Joe Sent Me. You can find it at joesentme.com. It is a newsletter. Not just it's designed for business travelers, but I think anybody who ever travels anywhere, anytime, would find most of it really fascinating, like I do. And that's to say nothing of the fact that I am madly in love with the man who is behind this newsletter, Joe Brancatelli, who not just because he's Italian, but that's a big part of it. How are you, my friend?
Happy New Year. I'm fine. I'm calling in a little bit like Anders from a little blue dot in the reddest county in New York State. So take that for what it's worth.
Oh, my. Well, we know you're fighting the good fight. We
get along fine.
That's good. That's good. So much I want to talk to you about, so I'm going to just jump right in. I've heard that TSA says absolutely, positively, no more delays. We're not kidding this time. May 7th, Real ID, those driver's licenses with that little starburst on them, you know, you're going to need that special super duper license plate if you want to get on a plane and don't happen to have your passport handy. We're not kidding this time. We are not kidding this time. We really, really mean it. Do you believe them, Joe?
Well, Joan, since we talked behind the scenes, the Transportation Department, and this is the Biden administration Transportation Department speaking, put out their rules about how they're going to enforce this thing that originally was supposed to be enforced in 2008, so we've had 17 years of delays. Take that for what it's worth. They now say, well, they may delay it, or they may be flexible in how they enforce it. So even while they're absolutely, positively, no jokes, we're really serious after 17 years of delays, you do this at your own risk, maybe not. And that's not even counting what the Trump administration Transportation Department will do when they take over on Monday.
Oh. Could they tell TSA enforce it, or we don't like this idea and get rid of it? Or could it be something that radical?
Again, what is radical when a bill that was passed in 2005 that called for implementation of Real ID in 2008 has been delayed 17 years by both Trump's administration in the past and two Democratic administrations? Many of the of Trump's supporters, they talk about the deep state all the time, and this is one of the deep state things they talk about. Why is the federal government approving state-approved licenses? And that's essentially what it is. It takes your Illinois license, in the case of most of your listeners, and turns it into a federally approved document. The deep state devotees, the conspiracy theorists, look at that and say, we can't be having that. So who knows what the Trump administration will do? They didn't enforce it for the 4 years they were in the first time. So,
Well, I had to renew my driver's license a while back. And, I made my appointment. I showed up. And then I was in line and I was thinking, oh, my gosh, while I'm here, I should, instead of getting a regular license, I should get a real ID. And there was a sign and it was like, do you have this document? Did you bring this document? Do you have this document? And I was like, oh, my God, so I went up there and I was like, could I have a real ID? And they were like, well, do you have this document? And do you have this document? And I was like, well, no, I have my driver's license. And they were like, they looked at me and they scoffed. They scoffed at me.
Well, I won't get into your interaction with the DMV. I luckily live in a state where you can do the standard license renewal electronically. I haven't been inside a DMV office in New York, and I don't know how long. But I did go so that I could give real information, real facts to your readers, to realid.ilsos.gov. In other words, Secretary of State of Illinois, but Real ID page. Okay, there are three things you need to do to get a license in Illinois or a renewal. On the comparison page for their Real ID page, there are 7 things you have to do to get a Real ID, including, by the way, submitting your passport if you have one, because you have to prove that you are who you are. Okay, it must step 2 is proof of identity. And how do you do that? You show them a passport. Okay, then you have to prove your proof of Social Security number. Then you have to have 2 identification forms that prove your current residency, which means a utility bill, rental agreement, bank deed, or title. Okay? Then you must provide proof of signature, which means a credit card or a canceled check or your current driver's license. Then you receive a standard license. Then, only after they review all of these documents you have to submit, might they send you an ID in 15 days. That's how complicated it is. You don't have to believe me. Just go to realid.ilsos.gov and look at the comparison. That's right there when that page opens up. For some people, it may be valuable. For most people, I continue to think it's a waste of time, even if they do implement it on May the 7th when they promise.
And I think... it's like I say, it's been months since I was there. I think it's more expensive, too.
That has changed, but for someone like you, if you have a current valid Illinois driver's license and you want to switch to Real ID now, there will be a fee. Mostly the fee stuff has gone away. But if you can imagine the worst confluence of the federal bureaucracy with the Illinois state bureaucracy, this is what Real ID is, okay? A bureaucracy built upon a bureaucracy to do something that we thought was a good idea 20 years ago that really has no basis in need in 2025.
And, I went through the rigmarole umpteen years ago to do global entry, where you had to fill out all this stuff, give them all this information. I had to drive out to O'Hare to sit for an interview. Global entry, by the way, I can now renew that online, which I just did. I typed a bunch of stuff, and they were like, yeah, you're good, you're good. They just sent me a new card. Since I've got, why can't I just go there and say, I'm global entry, I've done all this stuff, look, here's my card, give me that Real ID?
Because it's a state bureaucracy being controlled by a federal bureaucracy. And again, if you have a passport, let's leave the global entry and TSA pre-check out of this part of the discussion. If you have a U.S. passport, the only value in Real ID is getting on an airplane. If you have a passport, bring your passport, unless you plan on visiting a federal prison. And I mean as a visitor, not a guest of the system. You will need Real ID or your passport to get into a federal prison facility. I even checked. Some states require Real ID to enter their courtroom. For example, I in New York State had to go to my local county court to serve jury duty last week. But guess what? If you're called for jury duty, you don't need real ID either because they obviously don't want to.
I was going to say that would be a good reason not to get one.
Right?
I get called for jury duty, I swear, every 6 months. And I would love to have a get out of jury duty card. Not that I'm not willing to serve, but nobody ever seats me. And that's another discussion we'll go into for another time.
Yes. I'll put in a plug for New York. I was told that when I completed my jury duty last week in this red county that I live in, that I'm now good for 6 years. They won't call me again for 6 years. So every jurisdiction's a little different. I never even got near the courtroom with a voir dire.
If you had been sent home?
I never even got to I never got to the voir dire. We had to show up 2 days because there was some confusion. But I never, and of course, as journalists, we never get picked because we're dangerous. We actually take notes and pay attention.
That's what drives
so one
me
side
insane.
or the other never wants us,
Because I know I'm going to be there all day long, and then I'm just going to get sent home either directly from a courtroom or at the end of the day. In the old days, a million years ago when I was young and a young journalist, if you got a summons for jury duty, you basically could call them up and you could say, hey, like I'm a reporter at Channel 7, and they'd be like, oh, we don't want you. You're excused. But now.
Exactly. When I was at the New York Times and then the Wall Street Journal, it was like, we can't use you. Thanks for coming. Yeah. But I must tell you, and this is a diversion I know from travel, sitting there 2 days waiting to be voir dire, which I did not get, was sort of the equivalent of sitting in an automated laundry overseas in Italy or Spain or London, which I often have to do because I now only carry with carry-ons, so I occasionally have to go to a laundromat. It's fascinating because you meet people you would otherwise never meet and have fascinating conversations. So I can speak to that. If you're called for jury duty, go meet other people you might not meet. It's amazing who your peers are. Let me put it to you that way.
Yeah.
If we're going for a jury of our peers. Our peers are interesting people.
Joe Brancatelli writes the business news travel letter Joe sent me. You can find it at joesentme.com. We are going to take a break. And, Joe, I didn't run this by you ahead of time, but I was just reading a couple days ago about ETIAS and something else, like 2 new things that you might have to do, like even if you want to go to Europe. It's going to start at
I'll give you the downloads on that, yes. When you come back, I can tell you all about that.
Okay, so I read that. I heard watched a little video, and I thought, I still don't know what they're talking about, so maybe you can explain it to me. We're going to take a break. Joe Brancatelli and I will be back after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am joined by Joe Brancatelli, who writes is the founder of the business newsletter Joe Sent Me. You can sign up at joesentme.com. And even if you don't travel for business, there's really fascinating articles from a number of contributors that have to do with going places and staying places. And one of the interesting ones that you ran in this last year was, if you think you want to move out of the country, here are the requirements for like half a dozen places, what you have to do. I'm still putting that on hold, but you know what? I'm not discounting it completely. So what is ETIAS, which is going to go into effect, I believe, in the next 6 or 9 months?
Okay. Let us go back to, for just a moment, Real ID.
Okay.
All right. Right about the time, again, remembering that the Real ID law was passed in 2005 as a reaction to 9/11. Okay. We want to know who everybody is. Okay. The Patriot Act, all that stuff. We also passed in the United States a law that created something called ETSA, not ETIAS, but ETSA, ESTA, That requires everyone coming into the United States from a place where we don't require visas of them, which is most of Europe, just to take an example, to get an electronic approval before they come. Okay? You can't just walk up to you can't just fly in from London or Paris or Rome anymore as a European citizen and come with your passport and say, I just arrived, let me in the country. No, you have to acquire this thing electronically called ETSA. Okay? Now, the Europeans hated that. It was annoying. It's nasty. You have to do it in the case of coming to the United States every time you want to visit. So they said, we're going to get even. They're very Trumpian about this in a way. Okay? You're doing it to us, we're going to do it to you. So they created a system called ETIAS. Okay? They have been trying to get that going for about 7 years. Okay? And like Real ID, okay, they keep delaying it. The current version of ETIAS, which will require an American citizen arriving into a European community country to get this electronic approval before they enter the country. It's not terribly onerous compared. In fact, it's less onerous than what we ask the Europeans to do, because once you apply one time, it'll be good for 3 years and as many flights as you want, as opposed to the United States where you have to do it every time when you come in. But again, there are 30 countries in the European Union. They've had the most difficult time getting the thing together because you require electronic entry gates rather than just stepping up and saying hello in a foreign language to a customs agent. And the countries that weren't ready were the biggest country. Germany wasn't ready. France wasn't ready. Spain wasn't ready. The small countries were ready because they were threatened by the big countries. But it turns out the big countries weren't ready. So if they start this year around May, about the time Real ID is supposed to start, in fact, maybe it'll start on a country-by-country basis, but maybe it won't start at all. That said, Joan, we have to remember there was Brexit. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the Brits went their own way once they left the European Union, and they've created their own version because they're still mad at us. Again, still Trump-like. But they had their own Trump for a while, and Boris Johnson. They don't now. And their rule for visiting Americans coming into Britain has, in fact, gone into effect. The good news about that is when you buy a plane ticket to go to, say, London or possibly Manchester, if you're flying to Manchester, you will get a big alert thing saying, hey, if you're flying, you better make sure you have this thing. Click here to get it. So it won't sneak up on you if you decide to fly to London next week. Okay? Your airline will advise you to do it. But again, it's just another layer of bureaucracy that various governments have imposed on us, and we've imposed on them to make travel more difficult, more annoying, and more bureaucratic.
So the London
it's a reminder that travel is all politics. I have to write the same column every 4 years that travel is politics. Everything. It's not for nothing that in Casablanca they had letters of transit that could not be challenged, really? Even though it was signed by General de Gaulle. Why the Germans would put up with that, I don't know. But travel is about politics.
So if I were going to fly to Edinburgh, I would, when I booked my flight, I would get this pop-up that says you need to buy this thing.
You need to, they don't say buy it. You need to apply for, and forgive me, Joan, I've forgotten the whatever three-letter term, the acronym that the Brits now use. But you will be told you have to have this, get this approval. It costs, I think, about €10. Forgive me, about $10 and about £7. So you should get warned by the airline when you buy your ticket, or by any decent travel agent if you're going through a travel agent. But the airlines, since the airlines are required by international law to take you home if you're not allowed to come into the country, they want to make sure you have the approval.
I see.
So,
I see.
There was that story just around Thanksgiving of the woman who snuck aboard a plane to France from the United States, and then the French sent her home, but then she got thrown off the plane coming home and had to stay in France some more. The airline that carried her was Delta, and she snuck aboard the Delta flight. Delta was required to carry her home because they had brought her into the country illegally. So the airlines worked very hard, in fairness to the airlines, to alert you that you need this new little electronic document. So that's when you would probably apply.
All righty. So that's in effect already, but Real ID and ETS are not in effect yet.
Not at the moment, and there's nothing you can do to prepare for it.
Oh.
It's not like we'll get to it eventually. It's not even like Real ID that says, get you a Real ID in 2008, because 15 years later we may actually require you to have it. You can't apply for this thing yet because the Brits have gotten theirs going, but the rest of the European Union is still in chaos over it. I don't expect to be using it this year, frankly. I think it'll be delayed again. But even if it's not, again, your airline will really work very hard to make sure you have this document. And in fact, if you go to O'Hare without the thing in your file, they'll demand the number. It's a number, and if you don't have the number, you won't get on the plane. So you will have plenty of time to apply for it when the time comes.
I know with politics, the pendulum swings one way and gets way out, and then it comes back and swings the other way. At some point, will the United States and the United Kingdom and the European Union just say, you know what, let's just get rid of all this stuff? Or will they keep all these things? Because even though the cost isn't high, I think the video I saw said your ETIAS thing was going to be, again, about $10. Will they, by then, realize this is a nice little source of revenue that we don't really have to do much to acquire? Will this go away at some point, or is it here to stay?
I would say not in our lifetimes, Joan. At least your and I lifetime. Maybe if you're a nice college student listening today, it might go away in your lifetime. Things tend not to go away. Bureaucracies tend not to go away. I'm convinced somewhere in Washington there's still a Pony Express office. I mean, I'm not sure of that, but I believe that. But things do change. Back in the day, and at the early, there's a wonderful movie that's very little known in the United States called The VIPs. It stars Elizabeth Taylor and Burton and Orson Welles and a whole bunch of other people. And it's basically Grand Hotel at an airport, in this case London. And I was struck the other day when I saw it again, because it ran on Turner Classics, that the hostess making a point, and here's your immunization card. So, 60 years ago, you needed not only a passport, but a card to prove that you had yellow fever immunizations and other immunizations. We don't do that anymore. And more recently, we can look at all the things we had to do for those of us who traveled during COVID. We had to do testing and this, and we had to prove this and have this document. I still carry my CDC card that shows where all my immunizations, my COVID immunization shots are. No one asks for that anymore. They're not required anymore. So things do change. But these big, broad ones, the governments have a vested interest in knowing who's coming into their country, either because they're snoopy or because that's just the way bureaucracies work. So I would say no, not in the near term. But the good news is we can do all this stuff on our phone, except for getting your license in Illinois, where apparently you still have to show up and have a new picture taken. My picture hasn't changed in 20 years on my New York State driver's license. But the rest of this we can do on our phones, and it's not terrible if we really want to travel.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg led the charge and for some interesting consumer boons. The fact that, if the airline overbooks, you don't have to negotiate with them to get paid for that and all that. Were those changes like written into laws that are now immutable, or are those things that a new administration could roll back?
They are sadly something in almost all cases that a new administration can roll back. And oddly and unfortunately, I believe, today the DOT designate, Sean Duffy, who comes from Wisconsin, had his hearing, his confirmation hearing. He pretty much sailed through and, in fact, was introduced by a Democratic senator. So it's pretty clear he's going to pass, on a bipartisan basis. He was not asked a single question about airline regulating. He was asked about Boeing, and for good reason. I don't know how much support he'd have for rolling back things like the airlines have to refund your money when they don't fly your flight. Even the MAGA crowd, doesn't want that. But some of the more aggressive support that Secretary Pete really late in the administration put in, and including today where they just sued Southwest Airlines for chronically delayed flights, may go away. So it may not be as good as it's been the last 2 years in terms of consumer protection. But we'll
Joe, I let the time get away from me. My show is actually over. I apologize, Patty Vasquez, who's up next. When I talk to you, I just have so much fun that sometimes I forget to do my job, Mr. Brancatelli. But I thank you so much for sharing all of your information and insight with us today. Patty is next. I will see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Sorry, Patty. Have a good evening. Good night.